Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I think everyone can hear me. So my name's Greg Prentice. I've been at Microsoft for 11 years, and I've been assisting or running the Microsoft Chess Club for 11 years as well. Over the years, we've had a lot of great chess masters come through the facilities. Katerina Rohanian was here, Marcel Malat, International Master. We've had Nakamura here, and right now we have John Donaldson and Bu Jing. No, I messed it up at Bu. Here to present to us tonight and give us some lectures. I see a lot of young faces here, and this young lady over here, I remember specifically, she's like, who, me? No, the one next to you. I played her probably a year ago, and she drew me. So, I just want to congratulate you, because that was, I still remember our drawing with you, and I'm like, that girl's going somewhere. So I see a lot of familiar faces, and I'm glad that everyone's been able to make it here tonight. I think we got a wonderful night ahead of us. We have two great lectures, starting with John Donaldson. You want to stand up, John, and kind of say hi to the folks. And then followed by Bu. And then once we're done with those lectures, we're going to move over to the simul room for those that have signed up for the simul. And we're going to go, are we eating pizza prior to the simul? We have pizza on the way. So if you're hungry, wait till before the simul. Now, the other piece of advice that I will give everyone in the room is do not, during the simul, do not channel Magnus, right? Carlsen. We do not want to be Magnus during the simul. We want to channel Bu. So let's give him a hard-fought battle. Let's see if we can eke out a couple wins against Bu during the simul, because I think that might be kind of fun. Anyways, without any other delays, I'd like to introduce John Donaldson, who will kick us off with the first lecture. Let's give him a warm round of applause.
Well, I thank you all for coming. As you might guess, the topic of tonight's talk will be the Chess Olympiad. And in the world of chess, outside of the World Championship, it's the Olympiad, which is held every 2 years, which is the most significant event. And one thing I should mention for those of you who are more casual players, the Chess Olympiad doesn't have anything to do with the regular Olympics. It's separate, and it's had its own tradition since 1927, and it's been held every 2 years except for during the Second World War. So, we're going to start off here, and the first thing, let's see, I should use this one. And this one, yeah, okay. So, every 2 years there's a Chess Olympiad, and you'd be surprised at the number of countries that are willing to host this event, which is quite an expensive one, as I'll get to in a moment. Just recently, the Olympiad's into 2 of the 3 countries in the Caucasus. It was in Azerbaijan in 2016, and this last year was in Georgia. And so the first question I have for any of you is, Georgia, have any of you been to Georgia? And I'm not talking Atlanta. Oh, so I see some people have been to Georgia. Okay, it's not a typical country for most Americans to visit. I think it's for one reason. I mean, is it in Europe? Is it in Asia? Is it in the Middle East? It's technically in Europe, but most Europeans wouldn't be able to easily find it on a map. And Georgia, of course, when you think of chess, one thing comes immediately to mind, and what is that? Does anybody know?
Women's World Champions?
Yes, women's world champions in particular. So Maya Shverdnitsa, Nona Kaprindashvili, and a host of other very strong women players. And that tradition still holds true since the breakup from the former Soviet Union. Some of those players played for the teams that won in the Soviet Union pre-92, and then since then Georgia's done very well, and they medaled again in this Olympiad. So, so here you have Georgia, and you can see it's the, I don't have the, can I actually put the little cursor on it here? Oops, is that one? They're maybe not without the mouse, I'm not sure.
This is mirroring that, so you can do this.
Oh, okay, sure enough. Okay, so here, okay, touch. Bring it over, and so here, you can see, so there's Georgia for you with the arrow. So it's on the Black Sea, and you know, there's no easy way. I think those of you who have been there could attest, there's no simple way to get there. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So how does the United States choose the team that it's going to for the Olympiad, and how do they choose their captain and their coach? And it's a good question because it's much different than other countries, dramatically different in some cases. So many countries, they choose their players by committee. So they have like maybe the coach could choose it, or maybe the federation has a committee that chooses it. The United States doesn't do it that way. The way we do it is from a strict mathematical formula. They take their USCF rating, and they take their FIDE rating, and they take it at the time of invitation, and they also take the ratings going back 12 months, and they merge them all together, and they do the calculations, and then we have our team. But in our case, you could kind of guess that, at least for the first 3 players, it was going to be pretty clear-cut who they were. It was going to be Fabiano Caruana, it was going to be Wesley So, and it was Hikaru Nakamura. And from his performances earlier this year, it was going to be Sam Shanklin, not only by rating, but also because of the fact that he was U.S. champion, and that meant he was automatically seeded onto the team. And the 5th member of the team was Ray Robson, and he was selected by the rating formula. Once the team was in place, those 5 players were there, they then voted for their individually amongst their group for their coach and captain, and that was for Alex Lenderman, who's a grandmaster from New York. He's a 2630 FIDE, and it was myself as the captain, and this was exactly the same team, the same players, the same coach, the same captain who won the gold medal in 2016. The only difference on the team was that on boards 2 and 3, Hikaru Nakamura and Wesley So changed position for this Olympiad in recognition of the results over the last 2 years. So once we got the team together, the next question was like, how are we going to get there? And I can tell you one thing, the Olympiads may have been held since 1927, but how many chess Olympiads have been held in the United States?
0.
0 would be the right answer. And so, I mean, we're always on the road, and it means that with this Olympiad being in Georgia, it was like a 12-hour time difference, I believe. So, you know, we definitely needed to arrive early if we wanted to adjust to the time difference, which was quite considerable. And so our team, most of the people on the team, they flew to Qatar, and then they flew from there to Tbilisi.
Where did you fly to first?
To Qatar, or yeah. So you could also fly through Istanbul and then go to Batumi from there. But we chose most of the team members to fly to Tbilisi instead. And there are no direct flights from the United States. You have to change somewhere. So we flew from New York, and we chose Tbilisi because we knew that we would need to acclimate to the time difference, and we also realized that. You know, we didn't want to be in Batumi for 2 weeks, which is the place where the competition was held. So, moving on here. Just a second. Okay, whoops. Let's go back one. Okay, there we are. Okay, so this is just another view, and now here we are. Okay, so this is the first place when we landed, where we held up, and this is in Tbilisi, a very ancient city, and a pretty populous city. It's a couple million people. I would say at least a quarter to half of all the people in Georgia live in the capital. And you know, if you've gone to Georgia maybe 10 years ago, and I'm not sure, those of you who visited, was it recently or quite a long time ago?
We didn't work at that in Georgia.
And like in the
2 years ago in 2016.
Yeah, so it wasn't that long ago. Okay. Well, my understanding is that Georgia 10 years ago, touristic infrastructure wasn't that well developed, but now it's quite good and on a high standard, and it's very popular amongst a lot of travelers because it's perceived, and I think quite rightly, to be not only an interesting place to visit, but also a very economical place to visit. It's not expensive at all, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But the thing with Tbilisi that we really enjoyed was food. The Georgians were sort of famous in the former Soviet Union for having some of the best fruits and vegetables, and they have a very unique and very tasty, I should say, cuisine. So we had a good start going there. And then it was off to leave for Batumi. So I mentioned that Georgia was not a very expensive country. Well, this is a Swiss train, Swiss-made train, and it travels the 5 hours between Tbilisi and Batumi. And in second class, which seemed like it was about the same as first class, it was $10 one way. So not a bad bargain, I might add. But the first thing we realized when we got on this train that was very interesting was the language that most of the people were speaking on the train. So what language would you have voted for? Russian would be right. You're good about that. It wasn't Georgian. And you might find that a little curious because for any of you who know a little bit about the history of the region, you realize that Russia and Georgia have a complicated, shall we say, relationship. And in fact, there's some parts of Georgia that are, at least the Georgians say, is Georgia, and that the Russians are controlling. But, you know, politics are one thing and economics and people are another. And so what we found out is not only on the train ride, but all over Batumi, there was just, I would say maybe 75–80% of the tourists that were visiting were from Russia. And it sort of kept the traditions of the former Soviet Union sort of continuing along. And also it was a very affordable place. But we also saw people from other places, and we saw a lot of people from the Middle East, particularly from Saudi Arabia and from Iran. And you might think, oh, this is a little bit peculiar. Why are these people there? Well, somebody explained to me, and it probably explained also why there were about maybe a dozen casinos in Batumi. They just came to have a place where they could relax and enjoy themselves doing things they couldn't do at home. So, Batumi, it's right on the Black Sea. It was a beautiful place to have the Chess Olympiad. And if you stayed within about the first mile of the city that was surrounding the playing area, it was very, very modern. After that, once you started to go outside of the main areas, you know, it was more, you know, like in terms of the Soviet Union. But it looked like a country that's in a city that are definitely doing better now, and you know, tourism is definitely part of that prosperity. And this is the old part of Batumi. Batumi sort of first came into its own in the late 1890s when they discovered oil in Azerbaijan and Baku, and Batumi became the end of the pipeline, and that was where they built all these beautiful buildings in the center. And this gives you another idea of the skyline. All the tall buildings are all built pretty much in the last dozen years, and there are plenty of casinos there for any of those who would like to partake. Well, one thing about the Olympiad that was very clear is the Georgians don't just have a good cuisine, but they have a real sense of style, and they really put on a brilliant opening ceremony. I think some of you that got here early, you could see some of the closing ceremony that was being broadcast. But both of them were really, really good, and it's sort of like they went out of their way to sort of try to do even better than the last couple of Olympiads. And chess Olympiads, so how to describe them? Well, the first thing is, outside of soccer, if you think of chess as a sport, the only organization, sporting body that has more member nations than chess is FIFA, the soccer organization. So for chess, there were approximately 180 countries that came for this Olympiad, and they played in two sections. There were open section, and there was a women's section. Open section was open to everybody, regardless of gender. And in the past Olympiads, you saw women like Judith Polgar playing high board one for Hungary, and Pia Crowning, who played for Sweden. But most of the players in the open competition are male, and then there's a separate women's competition. So there were 180 countries with 5 players each playing in the open, and there were about 130, 135 play in the women's competition. So for one thing, this was a very unusual tournament in the sense that you had about 650 women chess players, of which probably like 300 or 400 of them were rated masters. So it was definitely a lot different than your American Swiss system tournament, to put it mildly. But it isn't just the fact that all these women playing that made this unusual event. There's also the diversity at the Olympiad. And so there's 180 teams competing, and out of that 180 teams, there's probably like 20 teams that think they're contending for medals, and maybe, I don't know, maybe half a dozen to a dozen that think they're competing for a gold medal. But there's a lot more teams in the Olympiad, and a lot of those teams are just there, for the chance to compete, that don't get many opportunities during the course of the 2-year interval between the events. And one of them was this team from Ghana. And you'll notice that they're all wearing their own uniforms. And that was something new for this Olympiad. They decided as part of this attempt to make chess more a team sport that all the teams should have their own national uniforms. And we had these electric blue blazers, as you'll soon find, but I think that the uniform from the team from Ghana is nicer. Always a question of taste. So here's our women's team, and you can see that in the middle that he didn't play. That's the captain and the coach for the women's team. They would have done even better if he had. It's Melik Kachian, and he's a grandmaster. He's from Armenia originally, but he makes his home in Los Angeles. And to his left is Irina Krush, multiple U.S. women's champion. To his right is Anna Zitansky, also a multiple U.S. women's champion. Both of them have been rated over 2,500 FIDE. On the left, with the purple hair, is Tatya Abrahamian, and she's about 2,400 FIDE, and she's also like Melik, she's originally from Armenia. And you'll notice the first three players I mentioned, Krush, Zitansky, and Abrahamian, they're all players who were born outside of the United States. And that's really been sort of the tradition of top-level American women's chess until now. Because now you see there's one other person in this picture, Miss Jennifer Yu, and she's really sort of the future of American women's chess. She did brilliantly in this Olympiad. She won the bronze medal on the reserve board, and she could have, she was in contention for the gold medal right up into the last round. And the U.S. women's team really wasn't expected to have a chance to medal, but they were always right in the competition right up until the very end, and she was sort of the secret sauce, the sort of surprise. And I suspect in the next Olympiad that there's going to be several other youngsters on this team and that they're going to do even better. So there's Irina, and she's now in her early 30s, but she's like a veteran. I mean, veteran sounds like a kind of a loaded word, but she's played in Olympiads for the U.S. for maybe like a dozen of them. So she's really played for a long time, and she's always played well. And here's Jennifer. Okay, so one of the things about the Olympiad that makes it different than what you might be used to, which is most of the time just playing, as an individual in tournaments, is in the Olympiads you play as a team. And so that means that although there's 5 people on each team, only 4 of them play at one time, and they play in a fixed board order. So at the very beginning of the Olympiad, you assign the players spots 1, 2, 3, 4, and reserve, and they can't vary that order. You can substitute and have anybody play, but if, for example, you rest the first board, you can't have the reserve player play on board 1. They have to stay in that order. And for this Olympiad, this is the second time in a row that they've played with 4 players and 1 reserve on each team. In Olympiads before that, they used to play with 4 men and 2 reserves, and 3 women and 1 reserve. So it was like 4 and 6. But they've changed that now in recognition of the fact that there's a lot more women playing, a lot more women, strong women players playing. A couple of things they've also changed in the last couple of Olympiads. One is the scoring system. It used to be that it was by game points, and so if you played in a match and there's 4 boards going on, you could get a maximum of 4 points, and you could get as little as 0. But now the only options are either you win the match and you get 2, you draw it, you get 1, and you lose it, you get 0. And this has definitely had an effect on the Olympiads. On the one hand, it's meant that it's more of a team-oriented competition because every point is precious for that individual match. It's also meant that it's very difficult to come back after a slow start because the scoring system is lower. It's 2-1 instead of a maximum of 4. And that was one of the reasons why the U.S. made it such a major decision to get there a week before the Olympiad, because in the past, in the days when the Yasser Seramon played so many times for the U.S. team, they would arrive at the Olympiads like the day before the event. They'd be jet lagged out of their minds, and they would, in the first couple rounds, things might not go exactly as planned. But then they would like have a couple 4-0 wins, everything was good, the Swiss gambit, if you will. But nowadays, you would just remove yourself from the competition. You have to get off to a good start, or it's not going to work. So, what you see here is a picture of the women in the blazers, and you'll notice again wearing the team uniforms. That's the team from India, but you'll notice their coach doesn't look Indian. That's Jacob Agar. He's a famous author and trainer, and it shows you how international and how professional top-level chess has become. Players have to be from the federation that they're representing. It's not like the Pro Chess League, for example. But the coach and captain, they can be from other countries, and it's not uncommon to have foreign nationals coaching a national team. And that's the case here with the Indians with Agar. And what you'll see also here is you can see the playing hall. You can see that there's all these tables, and there's 4 players on each side, representing one country, 4 players on the other side, and then the players all in the middle walking through. There's no spectators. Those are only players on other teams. And can you guess why they have such tight security at these Olympiads?
Cheating?
Cheating would be right. It has no concerns about terrorist threats, no concerns about consuming drugs that would give them a special edge. No, it's just about computer assistance. And so to that end, that's where it's really strict, and so strict that for the very first round of the tournament, the U.S. team actually, which had arrived like 40 minutes before, it took them about 60 minutes to get through the security checks. And we actually had time running on our clocks, even despite the fact that they had delayed the beginning of the round. And so it's very important that, it would be enough. When you think of computer cheating, sometimes you think like somebody like telling you the moves, like whispering them in your ear, or telling you repeatedly like throughout the game, or somebody like a Confederate signaling to you. But for these guys, these players are so strong. Just knowing once in the game that there's something special in the position, just a hint like that could make all the difference. So you just can't have it. And to that end, what they do is, one, they have like airport security screeners at the entrances to the playing hall. They also have people monitoring the entrance to the restrooms so people don't come in with any sort of electronic devices. They also do some random checks when people leave to use the restroom. When they come back, they just wave a wand over them to check them again in case they picked up something along the way. It's a little bit onerous, but it's necessary, and they're pretty professional. They've got a kind of smooth. Well, let's just put it this way: the second day and all subsequent rounds, we never had any problems with the security check, which I think was partly because they added 1 or 2 scanners, partly because they didn't check us quite so carefully. But it worked out in the end. There were no complaints about cheating. So, what did the U.S. team have that made us think that we had a decent chance to repeat as champions? Well, we had this guy, and he's not John Turturro's distant cousin. This is Fabiano Caruana, board 1 for the United States, number 2 ranked player in the world, and a guy who played Magnus Carlsen a match and tied him in classical chess. A nice guy to have on your team. 1, because he's stronger than you could ever imagine. And 2, also a very humble guy. Very, very pleasant, very easy to get along with, fellow, and just an incredibly strong player, and a guy who wants to play every single round. So, in essence, an ideal guy to have on your team. And he's playing here against Xiangzhi, who's the Dutch number 1. And you can see they're laughing and smiling before the game. As soon as the clock starts, they're not laughing and smiling anymore. Now, our board 2, wearing our team uniform, It was Wesley So. He's played in 2 Olympiads for us, and he hasn't lost a game in either of them. His performance in Baku was spectacular. He won an individual gold on his board as well as winning team gold. He played very well in moving up the board in Batumi, and again, a very easygoing guy who, really, really good team player. Now, here you get an idea of what it's like when the matches start out, and you can see in the foreground, in the background there is Caruana, So, and then I think somebody who's not a stranger to you, he plays for the Seattle Sluggers, Hikano Nakamura. He's been a standard bearer for the team since 2006, and he loves the Olympiads, and he's a real competitor. And then our 4th board is Sam Shanklin. Now, these are the same players that we had 2 years ago, in 2016. But one thing had changed in the intervening 2 years, and what would you say that was? Who had gotten substantially stronger? Shanklin got much, much stronger. He went from being, 2660, I'm sorry, you're only rated number 65 or 70 in the world, to a player who's 2725, who was the reigning US champion, who, as top 25 player in the world. So this, for our team, meant a slight change in the tactics. Whereas in the previous Olympiad, the first 3 played the bulk of the games, and the boards 4 in reserve, which were Shinker and Robson, divided duties for the first half of the Olympiads with the platoon system, and then sort of decided after that who had done best up to that point, and then made that decision to put in Shanklin for the final matches. But in this Olympiad, with Shanklin being considerably stronger than Robson, and I say that quotation marks because Shanklin is in the top 25, Robson's like in the top 60. It's not like Robson's a weak player, far from it. But Shanklin got the nod and won the play. So, who are our competitors going into this Olympiad? And I think that the FIDE ratings are a pretty good indicator of the way that you can sort of sum up the field. And so the teams that look like they would be the biggest competitors for us were China, who's the defending 2017 World Team Champions, and they had won the gold medal in Tromsø in 2014. Russia, they're always, traditionally they've been the highest rated teams in the Olympiads, and they have, always have, a great team, and they have a lot of support behind them. They have Andrei Filatov, he's their captain, is also a billionaire. Fortunately, that was not a job requirement for you to be U.S. captain. He really wants them to make a big result. He remembers the glory days in the Soviet Union. He wants the Russian team's results to return to that. Russia has sort of had a kind of a jinx, for some time. They have not won an Olympiad since 2002. The last time Kasparov played was in Bled. Now, to be fair to them, they tied for first with Armenia in 2012, and also they've had some good Olympiads where they played very well, but things just didn't fall their way. But they're always a very strong team, always a tough contender for first. But these 3 teams, although they may have been the highest by rating, it would not have been a huge surprise. It would have been a surprise, but not a huge one, if some of the other teams with average ratings over 2,700 hadn't won. And so for that, you could look at Azerbaijan, which has Mamajarov, who's usually number 3 in the world, and they have Rajabov in the top 20, and they have several other players that are over 2,700. Then another team that was also a big contender was India. Indians have done very well in the last couple of Olympiads, and they did that without Anand. They won, if I'm not mistaken, bronze in 2014, and I think they were 4th in 2016, and that was without their strongest players. So they were hoping that they would end up on the podium. And then another strong team besides those, I would say, Ukraine also had a team that averaged around 2,700. Older team, but you remember in Baku, just 2 years before, that team had scored 20 points. And to give you an idea, there's 11 rounds in Olympiad. So if you won all of your matches, all 11, you scored 22. So that Ukraine team scored 20. And that had never been done before in Olympiad and hasn't since. But they were second. They were unlucky. They lost on tiebreak to the United States. But they have they usually have 5 or 6 players they can choose from in the grade over 2,700. They tend to be more balanced in strength than some of the other teams. But so they were also a potential candidate. But there were other good teams too. There were many other strong teams. But I think that for our team, that we thought that the biggest rival for us, would probably be China, and that proved to be the case. It's a funny thing with Russia. It's almost like they have too many cooks. They have too many chefs to choose from. And I would not want to be in the situation they're in where they have somebody that actually chooses which players will play on their team. Okay, it'd be one thing if you only have like 5 or 6 candidates. That would be manageable. But in their case, you could probably make an argument for like 5 or 6 players easily to play like the last board or two. And so in their case, they chose not to go by the ratings, which would have been Spidler and Gersha, but they put in instead Yakovenko, and they put in Vichkov. Okay, both incredibly strong players and who played really well earlier in the year. Hence, they put them on the team. We thought they had the hot hand, and they were younger. It just turned out that it didn't work out that way for them. But that's a hard decision to have. I mean, potentially you want to be, you think to have more stronger players, but in their case, it's a bit tricky. And I think also for their team, sometimes, of course, every team wants to do really well, and they're really motivated. But I think that they feel even maybe extra pressure. At a certain point, too much pressure is probably counterproductive. But that could be a mistake. I mean, that's just what I feel, looking at it from a distance. So the hero of the Olympiad in many ways was the man in this photo, okay? Because, all of you know, how many games did he lose last year?
0.
No, that's close. What was it, 0 last year? Was it? I thought he lost 1. Yeah, you lost 1 game, okay? So that's a pretty good start. If you have a guy that's playing your first board and doesn't lose, you started off the Olympiad in good shape. But he also won a lot of key games for him. The other thing is you might notice, he's not normally on crutches. He had a cycling accident in Norway earlier in the year. He was a good sport about it. He said it helped him concentrate more because he couldn't walk around. But, I think it couldn't be easy, playing like this. But he played brilliantly for them. Okay, so for the United States, how would I compare our results in this Olympiad to our one in the prior one? Well, there's always the, when you win, you kind of like, well, we won, and you kind of tend to ignore the breaks that went your way. So when I think back about 2016, there were a couple of shaky moments, shall we say, okay? I mean, one was our match with India. Sam Schenkel won a tough game. That game could have gone either way, but we ended up really crushing India in that match because of potentially a full point swing in that game. Also, even in the last round, it was, it was not as smooth as it could have been, and we, the tiebreak went our way. So, in retrospect, I mean, in comparing the two Olympiads, I would say in some ways, up to a point, we played much better in 2018 than we did in 2016. In part because we played stronger teams. I mean, we didn't play China in 2016, and we didn't play Armenia in 2016 because they weren't there, because it was in Azerbaijan. And it seems to me that we played Russia and Ukraine, but we didn't play, we played India too, but we didn't play Netherlands, which was probably a top 12 team. But in general, we played stronger competition in 2018 than we did in 2016. And we also won a bunch of really good matches. By the time the Olympiad was over, we drew with Israel, that was one, and we drew with China in the final round, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But other than that, we won against Armenia, which is a very good team. We won against Azerbaijan. That was a team we didn't play in 2016. We won against Netherlands. We also won against India again, who's our favorite opponent, I think. I would say probably we beat 5 teams that were rated in the top 12. But we had one bad/unlucky match, and that was against Poland. And going into the Olympiad, I thought one team that was a dark horse to medal was Poland. They had medaled in the World Team Championship in 2017. They had a very good 1-2 punch with Duda, who's the strongest player in the world. He's the highest rated, I think, 20, maybe he's a little over 21 now, but he's really been impressive of late. He was kind of a slow starter, relatively speaking, but in the last 2 or 3 years, he's shown dramatic improvement, and he looks like a guy who really could go places. And he was backed up by Wojciech, another Polish player who's over 2,700. So he had like 2 guys that are in the top 25, 30 in the world. But the real question for their team was like, what sort of support these 2 guys were going to get. They were going to play most of the matches and they were going to do well, but what could you really hope from the rest of the team? Well, interestingly enough, the Polish captain chose the team, and unlike the Russian guys, he got it right. I don't know how he managed to do it, but it was like he had some sort of powers of prophecy, and he picked not necessarily the highest rated Polish players, but the Polish players that would really do well in this Olympiad. So he had, board 3 was going to be Pirin, he was going to be on the team anyway by rating, but the 4th and 5th ones, Tomczak and Dragoon, Dragoon, he was not even 2,600, he had been in the past, his rating had slipped, but those guys, they just played like men possessed, and is often the case in chess, when you play pretty well, and you get some lucky breaks, and you get some wins, and you get some confidence, and you get some momentum going, all of a sudden, you gain a couple inches in height. And that was the case with these guys. Tomczak won a game that looked a little shaky against Kramnik, and all of a sudden he was like 6'6". He was just like, and these guys, for a while, they were just performing like miracles, left and right. And, their top 2 guys were doing the job and blocking, but they were really winning the matches because they're bottom 2. So this match is the only match in the last 2 Olympiads that we lost. And we lost it 2.5, 1.5. And, if we had just got crushed, where they just came out and they just beat us, on every board, that would have made it easier. But it wasn't that kind of a match. It was kind of a match where they were trying to fight to survive from the beginning. On board 4, Xiangzhi had a huge advantage right out of the opening, almost near decisive advantage, I would say. And some of the other games we had very promising positions on as well. But in the end, all of our promising positions didn't turn out to be so promising. We only got draws. And the game that was the shakiest one, it was very tough on board 3, we ended up losing. And so all of a sudden, instead of being before this match, if we'd beaten Poland, we would have been 2 match points up with 2 matches to go. It would have been a very nice position to be in. But instead, all of a sudden now, I think we were 1 match point behind Poland. And Poland only had, they played all these really strong teams, but then they had to play against China. And China brought them back down to earth. And so at that same time, we won against Armenia. And to give you an example of how things have changed for our team, it was Sam Shanklin that won that match. And he won it by beating Narakunian with black, just as he helped us to beat Azerbaijan earlier in the tournament by beating the board 4 for Azerbaijan with black pieces again. So although this was a team led by the big 3, Sam Shanklin played a major role in our success in the competition. So that was really key that we beat Armenia, especially because I didn't know how our players would react after losing. In 2 rounds before, there was no more points to pretty much to give up. We needed to win that match. And also, since in the match against Poland, Hikaru lost, it meant that it was a good chance to rest him in that match against Armenia, and Ray Robson, who hadn't played for several matches in a row, he came through and did his job, and that allowed Hikaru to rest up, to have the white pieces, and we knew he was going to be playing against Boo, and we knew that he would have white, so the thought was that he would have an extra good pair, but not so easy to beat that back. So the long and short of it is, in the last round we played against China, it was a situation where if either team won, they would be clear first in the Olympiad. Two very strong teams, teams that match up pretty well with both sides. There was no big rating differential for either side, and it turned out to be kind of interesting on boards 2 and 4. Both games, the Chinese players, they played the same variation of the Catalan for about the first, I would say, maybe 15 moves or so, and but they got very small advantages, but not enough to convert. Board 1 ended, I think, about the same time or shortly thereafter. So then there was just the 4th game, and that was Hikaru's game against our guest here. And it was, I thought Hikaru might have some pressure, but it's a good example, I think, of how, you can do a lot of computer preparation, but experience also counts. It was in a variation of the 695 Slav, where Chinese players have played this variation many, many times and been very instrumental in developing the theory. And so I think experience sometimes, having a feel for it, it counts a lot of times. It's not the sort of variation you can knock out with like a one-move novelty. So then after we drew that match, then it was a question of what was going to happen next. Poland had their chances if they won, to win the Olympiad, but they ended up losing to India. And so, they played the toughest schedule of any team, and they deserve a lot of credit. But the Olympiad's very unforgiving, and at Swiss system tournaments, if you want to make a good result, you don't lose in the last round. And so they ended up just outside of the podium, and Russia got that place. I mean, Russia had gotten off to a slow start, and but they won a lot of matches down the end of the road. But they ended up not playing the United States or China, so they finished 3rd on tiebreak. But it was this first time they were tied for first, and I'm sure that in the Olympiads to come they're going to be competing for the top place again. So here's our team again, and just to give you an idea, this time we came with a flag. If any of you have seen the photos from the Olympiad from Baku, you'll realize that this time we made the good judgment to have the players take the flag with them, because in Baku we gave it to some of our team officials, and security was so tight in Azerbaijan that they were afraid they would get shot if they threw the flag across the playing area. So we were without a flag for that one. And you can see the shortest member of our team in the middle holding up the flag. That's Alex Lenderman, and he did a really excellent job as the team coach. And here you see the winning team. This was the first time since the days of the Soviet Union, I believe, that a team had won both both open and the women's competition. It's the first time. I think that's correct, because in the days of the Soviet Union, they were like monsters. I mean, they just won like every time, like gold medal for both genders. I think since the Soviet Union, they competed from 1952 to 1990, and in that time, how many times did they not win gold? Once.
Well, once they didn't
Once there was
participate,
they boycott. Yeah, they would boycott. But yeah, only in
Hungary won once.
Yeah, in '78 in Buenos Aires they won. And for the women, I don't think there was a single time the Soviet women didn't win.
Well, except I think Hungary, 88.
Oh, excuse me, right. Towards the end, in the late '80s. Before that, not. But let's just say the Polars.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all the photos there. So I thought I would open it now. Do any of you have any questions about the Olympiad?
I have a question. So,
Yes.
Can you explain what is the role for the coach and for the captain, and what is the difference with
Yes.
respect to
Okay,
chess?
so the role for the coach is basically to help the players with their technical preparations for the game. Okay, and so for our team, that meant Alex Linderman, but it also meant Ray Robson. So whoever the player that wasn't playing that day, he would help with the preparation as well. And of course, you know, in team meetings, players might discuss some of their individual, you know, suggestions or matchups about what openings might work. I would say that the team this time around, they communicated much better than they did in the previous Olympiad, just because they knew each other and they felt more comfortable with each other. But the role for the coach also is sometimes I would consult with him to any ideas he might have as far as like where our lineup should be. Okay, but the choice of who would choose the lineup, that would be the captain. Okay, now I know for some teams in the Olympiad, the captain just sort of like just says, you know, these are the guys who are going to play, this is where it is. For our team, it's a little bit different. We all know each other quite well, and you know, everybody wants to have the best result for the team. So sometimes we would have discussions about, you know, who would play, and to that extent, ultimately I'm responsible for choosing who those players will be for that round. And if things don't go right, it's my responsibility. But it makes sense to ask the players because they might see an individual matchup that might work well. And to put that in a perspective, where it really came up was within the round against Armenia before the last round. And keep in mind that the difference between Nakamura and Robson is like about 100 elo points. So the question was, should we rest Hikaru? And then we started asking, saying, like, should we rest maybe Sam? Should we rest Wesley? We could think of arguments to rest any of these guys for this one round. You know, there were different, you know, maybe this guy would do better with White with that. The only thing we were sure of going that round was that Fabiano would definitely play. But other than that, it wasn't so clear. But gradually, as a process of sort of communicating with each other and my giving it some more thought, we ended up deciding to rest Hikaru. And in retrospect, it looks pretty old school. You rest the guy that lost. But Ray hadn't played for like 5 or 6 rounds, so you're always a little worried that, you know, the guy's going to be a little rusty, a little extra pressure on him. But it turned out, thankfully, to be the right decision. As far as other things for the captain, one of the major jobs, I would say, is to make sure that the players can just concentrate on the chess and just focus on preparing for their games. And so whatever that takes, you know, you do. So if it means that, you know, one thing I always do for these Olympiads is I always bring a lot of sort of like basic medicines with me. I have a friend who's a doctor, and just knowing that, you know, in a place like Batumi, you can usually get what you want, but sometimes they're not familiar products for the players, and you feel more comfortable with something they know. So that was one of the things, and just keeping them healthy, because you'd be surprised, during the Olympiads, it's very hard to keep all your players healthy. I think in part because players are coming from all over the world, and there's always some people somewhere that are, it's like flu season, and so invariably players in our team get sick, and so keeping them, you know, in good shape is really important. I think also just helping them with psychological preparation, but the thing to do also to keep in mind, these guys are like world-class players. They know what they need to do, and although they may be rivals, you know, in other individual tournaments, for this tournament, they come together as a team. I mean, it doesn't mean like they're like best friends forever, but they want their teammates to do well, and they help each other out, and so. But also for our team, it's maybe different than for other countries. So I try to help them, like, you know, if they need problems with, like, you know, getting visas or making travel arrangements, and sort of whatever I can do just to make them, help them do better for their chess. That's the key thing. Yes.
In terms of your final lineup, before the scheduled session begins, when do you have to declare your lineup? Like the day before? Could you switch like a guy 15 minutes before?
Well, that's a very good question. What happens is that the round starts at 3 o'clock, except for the last round. It usually ends around 8-ish or so. There's always some games that go on a little bit longer, and until they're finished, the pairings can't be made. But by like 8 or 9, round's over, and then around 9, 10 o'clock, the pairings go up. And once they go up, then you have to discuss who's going to play, and then you submit that lineup the next morning, like at 9 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, that lineup becomes official. So, the worst thing you can do as captain is if you're not playing the first 4, if you play the first 4 automatically, they're going to put the first 4 in. But if you are the captain and you choose not to play the first 4 and you do not submit the lineup, not a pretty situation, because it means that somebody that didn't think they were going to play is going to end up playing. And it could shuffle the whole board over. And that's why one advantage I would say that Russia has, and China as well, they had more balanced teams. So with 5 players, it became more difficult to predict which one of their 5 are going to rest. Okay? With the U.S. team primarily playing 4 players, you have a little less flexibility. There's always that threat to put in the extra player, but after a while, maybe they don't give it as much weight. Now, something happened recently that might change that. And what would that be? What player did the U.S. recently gain?
Dominguez?
Yes, they gained Olympiad Dominguez. So now the U.S. has 5 players that are in the top 25, 30 players in the world. I would say if I were to describe what's happened in the last 3 or 4 Olympiads, I would describe it as a friendly arms race. The teams have gotten progressively stronger and stronger. I mean, I look at the teams that played like in 2012 and compared to the teams now, teams are clearly stronger than they were then. And it's not just the teams at the top, there's more depth overall. So the lineup goes in at 10 o'clock and then that's official. And so that's why, in terms of like doing your preparation, it really depends on the player and the situation. Some players might do some preparation beforehand. Obviously, if you're a board 1 and the other team only has 1 strong player, chances are that's who they're going to face. But if you're like the reserve player and you're playing on board 4, there's 2 possibilities who you want to play. You might decide it's more prudent just to get a night's sleep and start your preparation in the morning. For our team, it might also depend on the team you're playing against, how predictable their lineup will be. Yes?
So when you say preparation, are the players actually going over their opponent's games and talking strategy, talking openings?
Well,
describe that a little bit too.
Well, it's. I can describe to you how it used to be. In 1986, that was the first time I was the captain for the U.S. Olympiad team. And what I did is, there was a printed book that was called Tournament Chess. And it had cross tables and games of all round-robin tournaments where the average rating was over 24. And I sat in a hotel, the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, and there was a high-powered photocopy machine, and I spent about 12 hours copying every one of those pages twice, and then I cut all these pages up, and then I pasted it on sheets of paper for white and black for all the teams, okay? Thank goodness for technology, that doesn't have to be done anymore. But I would say this, though, it was useful at the time because some of the players were like Larry Christensen and John Fedorowicz, and I would get the sheets of paper back, and they would have like food stains on them and things like that. I could only imagine what would happen to their laptops now. But it was a different time, and so now, of course, everybody uses ChessBase. Everybody has a large database. Teams that match up pretty well with both sides. There's no big rating differential for either side, and it turned out to be kind of interesting on boards 2 and 4. Both games, the Chinese players, they played the same variation of the Catalan for about the first, I would say, maybe 15 moves or so. And but they got very small advantages, but not enough to convert. Board 1 ended, I think, about the same time or shortly thereafter. So then there was just the 4th game, and that was Hikaru's game against our guest here. And it was, I thought Hikaru might have some pressure, but it's a good example, I think, of how you can do a lot of computer preparation, but experience also counts. It was in a variation of the 695 Slav, where Chinese players have played this variation many, many times and been very instrumental in developing the theory. And so I think experience sometimes, having a feel for it, it counts a lot of times. It's not the sort of variation you can knock out with like a one-move novelty. So then after we drew that match, then it was a question of what was going to happen next. Poland had their chances if they won, to win the Olympiad, but they ended up losing to India. And so, they played the toughest schedule of any team, and they deserve a lot of credit. But the Olympiad's very unforgiving, and at Swiss system tournaments, if you want to make a good result, you don't lose in the last round. And so they ended up just outside of the podium, and Russia got that place. I mean, Russia had gotten off to a slow start, and but they won a lot of matches down the end of the road. But they ended up not playing the United States or China, so they finished 3rd on tiebreak. But it was this first time they were tied for first, and I'm sure that in the Olympiads to come they're going to be competing for the top place again. So here's our team again, and just to give you an idea, this time we came with a flag. If any of you have seen the photos from the Olympiad from Baku, you'll realize that this time we made the good judgment to have the players take the flag with them, because in Baku we gave it to some of our team officials, and the security was so tight in Azerbaijan that they were afraid they would get shot if they threw the flag across the playing area. So we were without a flag for that one. And you can see the shortest member of our team in the middle holding up the flag. That's Alex Lenderman, and he did a really excellent job as the team coach. And here you see the winning team. This was the first time since the days of the Soviet Union, I believe, that a team had won both both Open and the women's competition. It's the first time. I think that's correct, because in the days of the Soviet Union, they were like monsters. I mean, they just won like every time, like gold medal for both genders. I think since the Soviet Union, they competed from 1952 to 1990, and in that time, how many times did they not win gold? Once.
Well, once they didn't
Once there was
participate,
the
once
boycott. Yeah, there was boycott. But yeah, only in
Hungary won once.
Yeah, in '78 in Buenos Aires they won. And for the women, I don't think there was a single time the Soviet women didn't win.
Well, except I think Hungary, 88.
Oh, excuse me, right. So towards the end, in the late '80s. Before that, not. But let's just say the Polars.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all the photos there. So I thought I would open it now. Do any of you have any questions about the Olympiad?
I have a question. So
Yes.
Can you explain what is the role for the coach and for the captain, and what do you use with
Yes.
respect to
Okay,
chess?
so the role for the coach is basically to help the players with their technical preparations for the game. Okay, and so for our team, that meant Alex Lenderman, but it also meant Ray Robsonov. So whoever the player that wasn't playing that day, he would help with the preparation as well. And of course, in team meetings, players might discuss some of their individual suggestions or matchups about what openings might work. And I would say that the team this time around, they communicated much better than they did in the previous Olympiad, just because they knew each other and they felt more comfortable with each other. But the role for the coach also is sometimes I would consult with him to any ideas he might have as far as like what our lineup should be. Okay, but the choice of who would choose the lineup, that would be the captain. Okay, now I know for some teams in the Olympiad, the captain just sort of like just says, you know, these are the guys who are going to play, this is where it is. For our team, it's a little bit different. We all know each other quite well, and everybody wants to have the best result for the team. So sometimes we would have discussions about, you know, who would play, and to that extent, ultimately I'm responsible for choosing who those players will be for that round. And if things don't go right, it's my responsibility. But it makes sense to ask the players because they might see an individual matchup that might work well. And to put that in a perspective, where it really came up was within the round against Armenia before the last round. And keep in mind that the difference between Nakamura and Robson is like about 100 elo points. So the question was, should we rest Hikaru? And then we started asking, saying, like, should we rest maybe Sam? Should we rest Wesley? We could think of arguments to rest any of these guys for this one round. You know, there were different, you know, maybe this guy would do better with White with that. The only thing we were sure of going that round was that Fabiano would definitely play. But other than that, it wasn't so good. But gradually, as a process of sort of communicating with each other and my giving it some more thought, we ended up deciding to rest Hikaru. And in retrospect, it looks pretty old school. You rest the guy that lost. But Ray hadn't played for like 5 or 6 rounds, so you're always a little worried that, you know, the guy's going to be a little rusty, a little extra pressure on him. But it turned out, thankfully, to be the right decision. As far as other things for the captain, one of the major jobs, I would say, is to make sure that the players can just concentrate on the chess and just focus on preparing for their games. And so whatever that takes, you know, you do. So if it means that, you know, one thing I always do for these Olympiads is I always bring a lot of sort of like basic medicines with me. I have a friend who's a doctor, and just knowing that, you know, in a place like Batumi, you can usually get what you want, but sometimes they're not familiar products for the players, and you feel more comfortable with something they know. So that was one of the things, and just keeping them healthy, because you'd be surprised, during the Olympiads, it's very hard to keep all your players healthy. I think in part because players are coming from all over the world, and there's always some people somewhere that are, it's like flu season, and so invariably players in our team get sick, and so keeping them, you know, in good shape is really important. I think also just helping them with psychological preparation, but the thing to do also to keep in mind, these guys are like world-class players. They know what they need to do, and although they may be rivals, you know, in other individual tournaments, for this tournament, they come together as a team. I mean, it doesn't mean like they're like best friends forever, but they want their teammates to do well, and they help each other out, and so. But also for our team, it's maybe different than for other countries. So I try to help them, like, you know, if they need problems with, like, you know, getting visas or making travel arrangements, sort of whatever I can do just to make them, help them do better for their chess. That's the key thing. Yes.
In terms of your final lineup, before the scheduled session begins, when do you have to declare your lineup? Like the day before? Could you switch like a guy 15 minutes before?
Well, that's a very good question. What happens is that the round starts at 3 o'clock, except for the last round. It usually ends around 8-ish or so. There's always some games that go on a little bit longer, and until they're finished, the pairings can't be made. But by like 8 or 9, round's over, and then around 9, 10 o'clock, the pairings go up. And once they go up, then you have to discuss who's going to play, and then you submit that lineup the next morning, like at 9 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, that lineup becomes official. So, the worst thing you can do as captain is if you're not playing the first four, if you play the first four automatically, they're going to put the first four in. But if you are the captain and you choose not to play the first four, and you do not submit the lineup, not a pretty situation, because it means that somebody that didn't think they were going to play is going to end up playing. And it could shuffle the whole board over. And that's why one advantage I would say that Russia has, and China as well, they had more balanced teams. So with 5 players, it became more difficult to predict which one of their 5 are going to rest. Okay? With the U.S. team primarily playing 4 players, you have a little less flexibility. There's always that threat to put in the extra player, but after a while, maybe they don't give it as much weight. Now, something happened recently that might change that. And what would that be? What player did the U.S. recently gain?
Dominguez?
Yes, they gained Olympiad Dominguez, so now the U.S. has 5 players that are in the top 25, 30 players in the world. I would say if I were to describe what's happened in the last 3 or 4 Olympiads, I would describe it as a friendly arms race. The teams have gotten progressively stronger and stronger. I mean, I look at the teams that played like in 2012 and compare to the teams now, teams are clearly stronger than they were then. And it's not just the teams at the top, there's more depth overall. So the lineup goes in at 10 o'clock and then that's official. And so that's why, in terms of like doing your preparation, it really depends on the player and the situation. Some players might do some preparation beforehand. Obviously, if you're a board 1 and the other team only has 1 strong player, chances are that's who they're going to face. But if you're like the reserve player and you're playing on board 4, there's 2 possibilities who you want to play. You might decide it's more prudent just to get a night's sleep and start your preparation in the morning. For our team, it might also depend on the team you're playing against, how predictable their lineup will be. Yes?
So when you say preparation, are the players actually going over their opponent's games and talking strategy, talking openings?
Well, I mean,
describe that a little bit too.
Well, it's. I can describe to you how it used to be. In 1986, that was the first time I was a captain for the U.S. Olympiad team. Yeah. And what I did is, there was a printed book that was called Tournament Chess, and it had cross tables and games of all round-robin tournaments where the average rating was over 2400. And I sat in the hotel, the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, and there was a high-powered photocopy machine, and I spent about 12 hours copying every one of those pages twice, and then I cut all these pages up, and then I pasted them on sheets of paper for white and black for all the teams, okay? Thank goodness for technology, that doesn't have to be done anymore. But I would say this, though, it was useful at the time because some of the players were like Larry Christensen and John Fedorowicz, and I would get the sheets of paper back, and they would have like food stains on them and things like that. I could only imagine what would happen to their laptops now. But it was a different time, and so now, of course, everybody uses ChessBase. Everybody has a large database.